From the stable of 33 Prosper Media comes a tale to share. Imagine marrying the love of your life, only to realize every night after your wedding that you were drunk, yet you can't remember having any drink or how. But one morning, he woke up sober, and lying right next to him was his wife and her own elder brother, tangled in each other's arms and completely naked underneath the sheet. What if it was all a setup? It wasn't alcohol at all. He realized the pattern, the setup, and the truth turned out darker than any hangover. Now, why was she doing it right next to him on their matrimonial bed? Have you ever wondered why the first thing that comes out of their mouth when they are caught is always, "It's not what you think"? This will blow your mind, and this you need to discover.
The rice, with all of its embellishments and aroma, got processed in the mouths of the crowded guest, and eventually got flushed into the stomach with wine and the different assorted drinks available. Laughter clinked against the iron poles of the tent, as people took pictures with the kind of smiles that live for photographs and disappear once the shutter clicks. He stood beneath a canopy of yellow lights, a little stouter than he'd been in his 20s, wearing a suit that he had scrimped to afford, and watching with a sense of fulfillment at the woman that just walked down the aisle toward him like the end of a long search. David was the kind of man that people described with small adjectives: steady, soft-spoken, not dangerous, but the kind you couldn't forget to be jealous of. He'd worked spare hours at a printing press. He married Mara with a grin that never quite reached his eyes, but simply the way people smile when they're trying to be brave and grateful at the same time. Mara was the spark, whenever she laughed infectiously for the small church and dragged people into her orbit. Everyone said she would be the kind of wife to set a house on fire, not literally, not in the telling you do at dinner, but in the sense that she made things happen in reality. The town had known her family for years. Her father was a subtle man who kept to the back row in the church, and Jonah, her elder brother, who worked odd jobs and had a laugh like a crow. The wedding passed like a forgiving dream. They danced until the electric lights buzzed, and in the row of seats, that night, his friends patted his back and said, "You lucky dog." After the wedding reception party, people drifted away, and the newlyweds walked away in each other's arms. They collapsed into one another and fell asleep with the guiltless exhaustion only true happiness could buy. The first strange thing happened the next morning. David woke with a trembling head and a fog that wouldn't lift off. He found a glass by the bedside and the faint smell of cheap rum. He laughed it off as wedding indulgence. Everyone drink at weddings, he thought. He joked about it to his cousin at work. "I had the mother of all hangovers." His cousin clapped him on the shoulder and bought him a soda. But the nights kept behaving the same, since the wedding night, becoming a foggy black seam sewn into his life. Sometimes he would remember a drink at a neighbor's place, and he would frown at the frequency of its recurrence, because he didn't want his newly wedded wife to think he had just developed a new habit. A drinking habit. Sometimes nothing. He'd wake with crumbs of memory, a laugh that was too loud, a heavy hand on his shoulder with a cigarette burned to ash. He decided to meticulously observe himself and do a self-examination. He started keeping a small notebook by the bed to tell him how much he drank. Each morning he scribbled numbers that didn't add up. "Maybe it's the stress," Mara said over his shoulder once, handing him a bowl of soup. "Marriage is a lot, babe. You'll be all right." She kissed him like people kiss for a reassurance. And Jonah? Jonah appeared with helpful smiles and bigger shoulders. He propped their light bulbs and fixed a leaky pipe. Jonah carried crates up the stairwell and left them with a grunt, always staying long enough to drink and laugh, but always leaving before the early morning. People in the neighborhood called him good to have around. David, drained and trusting, called him a brother.
Pause from the story for a second and ask yourself, have you ever had a bad night you couldn't explain the next morning? What did you do? What will make you start raising an eyebrow over your less than 1 week marriage?
A week rolled into weeks. At the factory, when the press clattered and the smell of ink broke his head like a wave, coworkers began to joke. "You look wrecked, Dave." He would force a smile and rub the back of his neck. Inside, unease gnawed him like a stubborn rat underneath his bed. It was not one night, but continuous and consistently. He began to see the stitches in his life unraveling. One night he decided to test the thread. He would not drink. He would stay awake or drink water until dawn. He resolved. He would prove to himself that the blackouts were just drunken mistakes and that if he controlled the bottle, the fog would lift. Mara left late that night to meet a friend. Jonah came by, claiming to check on the gutters. They sat on the couch and watched a football game on TV. Jonah poured 2 glasses of something amber into the room like a ritual, but David refused to drink, and Jonah shrugged and pretended not to notice. The television murmured in the background. At 11:15 p.m., Jonah stood and patted David on the knee. "You should sleep, mate. You look wrecked." David sank into the bed like a man folding into a chair he'd never sat in before. He kept his eyes open, while counting the loud ticks of the wall clock. He promised himself he would pull out his phone if he felt strange. He promised he would not drink. The next morning, he woke with the same fog. He fumbled for his phone and saw a text sent at 2:03 a.m. from Mara, "I love you. Sleep tight." He checked the time, but had no memory of unlocking his phone. That night Jonah had gone earlier than usual. Mara's laugh was in the hallway like an aftertaste. David felt a seed of something frosted inside him. It was not just betrayal he was beginning to smell, it was a design. His notes began to cluster, as he was beginning to observe that each blackout happened after Jonah visited. And each time, Mara was unusually tired or absent in the morning. David started to set traps for himself, a hidden camera in the living room, a cheap webcam he could afford, a note tucked under a plate, a dummy wallet in his pocket. He became a man trying to catch a ghost with a shoebox. He made a decision to do something desperate. He staged himself for the truth, and the revelation he got that morning was worse than the fear. And at night, he poured himself a whiskey and left most of it untouched. He went to bed and set the camera, with his hands trembling. He set alarms across the room, and told himself that he was ready to confirm what is happening to him, and to his life. He was ready to know. The following morning, he woke up with a clearer head than usual and noticed the camera still blinking and recording. He was happy and relieved that camera was doing as expected. But the moment he turned on the bed, he froze. He couldn't believe the first shocker that he got. He blinked repeatedly and rubbed his eyeballs with the back of his hands to ensure clarity. Then, he sat up gently and moved to the edge of the bed, staring with his mouth half opened. What he saw was not just a betrayal, but a serious abomination, despicable, and certainly a taboo. Mara and Jonah lay tangled in each other's arm and completely naked under the bedsheet. 2 respectable siblings, held in high reputable esteem. He almost screamed and caused a scene, but his instinct got the best of him and urged him to hold his peace and find out the truth about what happened the night before. He crawled quietly from the bed. He crept toward the camera with his breath, quaking like a trapped bird. His mind still wouldn't let go of the sight of the 2 bodies lying under the loose blanket in a way that he would never had imagined in rotten dreams, Mara and Jonah, curled, arms wrapped on each other, faces slack with sleep. They breathed like 2 people who had fallen off the edge of something and never tried to climb back. He could have screamed, or maybe, he could have run, but instead he stood like a living statue, as a memory the size of an ocean crashed over him. He picked up the first camera and was glad that it had recorded everything, he thought. He rewound with numb fingers, not really sure of what to expect, but certainly becoming scared of the truth that was begging to be revealed. Footage played, Mara and Jonah returning from the corner bar at 1:42 a.m. They sat, their voices low, and Jonah poured 2 drinks. He walked to the bathroom, with camera catching the tilt of his head, the way his hand brushed against Mara's cheek. David had never seen them like that. The recording made it obscene by clarity. He watched Jonah lift Mara's chin and lean down. He watched the room tilted and the entire unholy act was well presented in the footage in his hand. At 2:03 a.m., the image stuttered, a small blur at the edge of the frame, then a close-up of the wine glass David had left on the coffee table. The timestamp flickered. The liquid in the glass had a sheen, a pinprick of slow-motion movement. He cupped the glass in his palm like someone who'd found an artifact and couldn't put it down. He tested the glass. In the footage, Jonah talked in a low voice to someone on the phone, his words muffling, but David was still able to hear his own name somewhere in Jonah's. The evidence mounted, confirming that it wasn't that he was merely drunk, it wasn't that he was losing himself in joy. The truth is that he was being robbed of wakefulness. Betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives wrapped in a kindness you mistook for love. That morning, David sat on the couch in the living room, and waited for both of them. He was forced to take little shot from a fresh drink, while he waited. It was Mara that came into the living room after about an hour, and David late discovered that Jonah had gotten up and sneaked out through the back door. David confronted Mara that morning with his stock full of the footage and his voice shredded. She laughed at first. "You think I'm that stupid?" she said, and the question itself was a sword to David's chest. "I woke up sober, on the same matrimonial bed that was devoid of every sense of decency, and adulterated right beside me while I was sleeping. And you are asking me if I think you are stupid?" David said. "I don't know what you are talking about," Mara said. Her unfamiliar boldness in lying was not only adding to the shock, but also becoming scary to David. "I saw the video," he said to her. "You saw the video? What video?" she asked dismissively. "I saw you and Jonah. After the mysterious frequent drunkenness, I installed cameras in the house, and now I have evidence of everything," David informed her, and she softened and slid down the wall like someone who'd been waiting for the floor to open. "David. Wait. It's not what you think." Those 3 words, "it's not what you think," had killed 1,000 conversations in the world. They were the cloak of cowards, and right then, David was sure that he couldn't swallow them anymore.
Take a brief pause from the story and ask yourself, what would you do if your spouse said, "It's not what you think"? Would you believe them? David's life narrowed to one line: find out how, find out why. He made a decision that was less brave than it was simple. David would force the truth to speak out.
"David," Jonah said, coming in from God knows where, and the softness in his tone was the only cruel thing left. "It's not what you think," Mara whispered. No. This was what it was. It was a long, ugly history uncovered. It was a betrayal that had the shape of a family secret, the kind that flowers in silence and feeds on denial. Mara told a story then, a small stuttering confession that had long remained in her shadow. When she was a child, there had been a man in the family who did things that left everyone dizzy. Jonah had been the one who protected her, he had held her when their father's temper unspooled. When their father died and the house's money ran thin, Jonah had stayed close in ways that blurred the lines. They had learned to turn tenderness into safety. They had told themselves they were protecting one another from worse things, and she was made to believe that she was being protected from treacherous boyfriends. The words fell like stones, and David couldn't draw the line between stupidity and naivety. Or probably, just blatant lies. They were human and monstrous at the same time. "You married me because I loved you," she said. "I thought I could be normal." "I thought." "Thought." David echoed. "You thought you could keep this and make a life with me? You thought your secret would go on forever without hurting someone?" The house answered with the quiet of people who had tended to fragile lies and believed them to be true. Jonah stood and put his hands in his pockets like a man finding his balance. "I loved her," he said. "We're not monsters in a horror story, Dave. And neither are we the worst of human. It might seem something that no one should be proud of, but at least, we are happy. This is messy, and I know that it's not clean. We didn't plan to hurt you. Not plan. David's voice lost its edges and turned serrated. Who are you, and what exactly are you? Did you just hear yourself? Okay, that's by the way, so tell me. So the nights I could not wake, that was an accident too. Your brotherly hugs and pretended love. You're helping me with the pipes. Jonah's jaw worked. You were in the way. It wasn't us who made you sleep. He sounded small and terrified. David felt the last thing that tied him to this life, affection, burn out like dry grass. He wanted the world to be smaller, to hold just the facts. He wanted clear answers. The human heart is a poor machine for divine revenge. Instead, David asked the only question left, did you do it? Did you drug me every night? Mara's face was a map of something like guilt and maybe fear. Not Jonah, she said, quick and breaking, and sounded like someone who was willing to take the fall for another. But Jonah, he kept the nights and kept me company. I thought if, her voice thinned. I thought if you were tired, you'd leave it alone. I didn't know how to stop. David heard the confession in a different register, not the method, but the meaning. And somewhere in that confession, the method loomed. He left them there, like two guilty things, and took the camera from his coat. He had recorded Jonah's small private exchanges, and then he had waited. He had watched what men do when they have permission to be cruel. Betrayal can obviously sometimes wears the face of protection. It calls itself care, so it can hide. David did not call the police that morning, because the law is a blunt instrument in the face of the kinds of wrong that were not always measured in crime books. He packed 2 bags. He took his notebook, the camera, and the pictures he forgot to hang, and walked out into the dawn light like a man who had woken up from a long illness. Mara called his name through the door. Jonah watched from the threshold like a figure cut out of smoke. On the bus, the city unfolded like a confession. He thought of his father, who had liked simple certainties. He thought of his own hands, the press ink that were visible under his nails in spite of all the cleaning. He thought of how easily life folded into things you did not expect and sometimes did not deserve. He posted a short video the next day, not the footage of the bedroom, that he never shared. Instead, he sat in front of the camera and told the truth as far as he could bear, I loved someone. But she loved someone else in ways that I did not understand. I woke up one morning and found it was a house of secrets. I left. I'm not proud of everything I did. I'm not innocent. But I'm awake. People commented, and they argued and picked sides. Some called him a fool for leaving instead of fighting. Some called him a coward for not pressing charges. Some wrote about the cruelty of secrets kept under the skin. People shared their own stories of waking to small tragedies. A community gathered in the wake of the confession, not to condemn, but to testify that betrayal is not rare and that the small acts of wakefulness are sometimes the bravest thing a person can do. There are betrayals that can be undone and ones that are found out. There are lies that start to feel like kindness and kindness that diffuse into betrayal. The real test isn't the discovery, it's what you do next with the wakefulness you've been given.
If this were your story, would you stay to fight, or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments which you would choose and why. If you've ever felt betrayed, share one small thing that helped you wake up. I'll pin the most honest reply. Please subscribe and share. Stay blessed.